Good evening. Tonight, we're going to tell you about an unusual story. It happened back in 1959, quite a bit long ago. Now, you may ask yourself, what is this about? Well, it's about a mysterious disappearance. Let me ask you, what would you do if you found yourself in this situation with this series of events? Let's begin. They were careful people. That was the part everyone agreed on. 9 hikers, young, disciplined, trained, pitched their tent high on the mountain slopes of a nameless mountain in February of 1959. The wind was sharp enough to bite skin through wool, but they were not afraid of the cold. But when you were Russian, the cold is an old friend. They ate, joked, wrote in their journals. Someone took a photograph. Snow pressed softly against the canvas like a listening ear. And then something happened. No one knows what it was, only what it made them do. Sometime in the dark, the tent was cut open from the inside. Not unzipped, not untied, slashed urgently, as if the door itself had become a threat. They didn't stop to put on boots. They didn't grab their coats. They didn't take the food or the flashlight hanging uselessly above them. They fled. Down the mountain, barefoot in places, socks soaking through in the snow. Their footprints told the story later. No running, no scrambling, just a deliberate walk away from warmth, away from safety, away from reason. The mountain did not chase them. By the time researchers arrived later, winter had preserved the scene like a crime it refused to explain. 2 bodies lay near a burned-out fire beneath a cedar tree. Their hands were scorched black, fingers frozen as if desperate to find heat. Higher up the slope, 3 more were found collapsed, as if they had tried too late to crawl back toward the tent they had abandoned. Hypothermia, the report said. Simple. Understandable. The others were not so simple. 4 bodies were discovered months later, buried in a ravine under meters of snow. Their injuries were brutal. Crushed ribs, shattered skulls, but their skin was barely marked. No cuts, no bruises, as if the damage had come from something enormous, precise, and invisible. One woman was missing her tongue. The official explanation, when it finally came, was calm and sterile. A natural force. A snow slab avalanche. A sudden collapse of compacted snow that struck the tent, causing panic and injury. The hikers fled. The cold finished what the mountain began. It sounded reasonable. But history is not only what sounds reasonable, it is what survives scrutiny. There were problems. No avalanche debris covered the tent. The slope was shallow. Not known for slides, the tent poles were still standing. The footprints remained visible days later, neat, unburied, unbroken. Some of the most severe injuries were found far from the tent, long after the group had separated. And then there was the behavior. Experienced hikers do not abandon shelter in a blizzard without boots. They do not scatter in the dark without a plan. They do not calmly walk into death unless something has convinced them that staying is worse. radiation was found on some clothing. Nothing immediately lethal, but nothing easily explained. Witnesses in nearby areas reported strange lights in the sky that winter. Official files vanished, reappeared, and were quietly closed. Of course, the mountain offered no testimony. Decades later, new investigations would reopen the case and return to the same conclusion. Avalanche, natural forces, tragedy without malice. But even now, that explanation leaves gaps wide enough for unease to slip through. Because an avalanche does not explain why they didn't return. It does not explain the measured footprints. It does not explain injuries that resemble a car crash without a car. It does not explain the silence, the absence of a single clear moment where everything makes sense. History students often want answers, dates, causes, conclusions. The Dyatlov Pass Incident offers something rarer and more honest. It reminds us that the past is not always a solved puzzle. Sometimes it is a frozen scene on a mountainside, preserved just well enough to show us what happened after the decision, but never the decision itself. 9 people left a tent in the middle of the night. We know where they went. We know how they died. What we do not know, and may never know, is what convinced them that the tent was no longer safe, and the mountain, after all this time, still isn't talking. Field Notes, Ural Expedition, 1959. The date of the initial survey was February 26, 1959. Location, eastern slope of Dyatlov. Weather, severe, sub-zero, high winds. Objective, locating missing group led by I.A. Dyatlov. The tent was found on the slope, partially collapsed, secured to the ground. Snow accumulation was minimal. The structure itself showed no signs of having been struck or buried. Upon further inspection, it was determined that the tent had been cut open from the inside. Multiple slashes were present. The entrance flap was closed and functional. Inside the tent were personal belongings, boots, heavy coats, gloves, food supplies, notebooks, and a camera. The items appeared deliberately left behind. There was no evidence of a struggle within the tent. Footprints were observed leading downwards towards the forest, approximately 500 meters away. The tracks belonged to multiple individuals. Some impressions indicated bare feet or socked feet. The spacing suggested walking, not running. No additional tracks were observed in the surrounding area. No one else was observed to have been there, in other words. First, 2 bodies were located beneath a cedar tree at the edge of the forest. A small fire had been constructed. Branches up to 5 meters high showed signs of breakage, suggesting an attempt to climb the tree. Why? Maybe they thought they were being chased by something. Maybe they were. Both individuals were wearing minimal clothing. Their hands showed burns and abrasions. Cause of death was determined to be hypothermia. It was pretty obvious what happened. After whatever maybe chased them up a tree, or what they may have thought chased them up a tree, they tried to set a fire, and in their struggle to get as warm as possible, they burned their own hands in the attempt. Sadly, it did not help them. 3 additional bodies were found between the tree line and the tent, positioned at intervals along the slope. Their posture suggested movement uphill. No fatal injuries were observed externally. Cause of death, hypothermia. At this stage, the incident appeared tragic but comprehensible. Further discoveries, however, complicated this assessment. After snowmelt, 4 additional bodies were located in a ravine approximately 75 meters deeper into the forest. They were buried beneath several meters of snow. These individuals were more adequately clothed, including garments later identified as belonging to the deceased found earlier. Interesting. Autopsy reports documented several injuries, all internal. Multiple fractured ribs, extensive chest trauma, a crushed skull. Notably, these injuries showed little to no external damage or soft tissue. The force required was described by medical examiners as comparable to that of a high-speed vehicular collision, with no external injuries. One female victim was missing her tongue and portions of her facial soft tissue. No clear signs of defensive wounds were present on any of the bodies. No evidence was found of hand-to-hand combat, presence of other groups, any animal attack, weapon use. Radiological testing later identified elevated radiation levels on certain items of clothing. These levels were not immediately lethal and were inconsistently distributed. To be of note, some of them may have been working in conditions that brought them in regular intervals with radioactive material. This is Russia. Witness reports from earlier nearby regions reference unusual atmospheric phenomena during the same time period. These reports were not included in the final case summary. The prevailing hypothesis concludes that a sudden natural event, most plausibly a snow slab avalanche, forced the group to evacuate the tent. Panic, disorientation, and extreme weather conditions then resulted in dispersal, injury, and death from exposure. However, several observations remain difficult to reconcile fully with this explanation. The absence of avalanche debris at the tent site is a key issue. The stability of the tent structure and anchors, the preservation of footprints over an extended period, the calm, orderly nature of the initial descent, the location and severity of internal injuries far from the tent. These inconsistencies do not disprove the hypothesis. They do, however, prevent absolute certainty. Final conclusion, as recorded. The deaths were caused by exposure to extreme environmental conditions, following the influence of a powerful natural force with which the hikers were unable to overcome. This conclusion is technically accurate. It is also incomplete. The investigation can document where the group went, how their bodies were found, and what ultimately caused biological death. It cannot definitively establish what prompted 9 experienced individuals to abandon shelter at night, inadequately dressed, in lethal conditions. Experienced hikers, no less. The mountain provided no further evidence, and the file is therefore closed. I'd like to thank you for going on this journey with me, exploring this very unusual incident. Having looked into it myself, my personal conspiracy theory is a Yeti attack, but that's just me. Leave a comment and tell me what you think happened to these unfortunate individuals. And next time, we hope we can bring more discoveries to light.